Here we are for another round of the 70s versus the 90s, and it's a look at life in the LAPD when I put Richard Fleischer's The New Centurions against Clint Eastwood's The Rookie. But this one was another hard decision because both of these movies are very good in their own right, you know. So let's just dive right on into The New Centurions, directed by Richard Fleischer. And it's based off of a novel by Joseph Wambaugh, who did a lot of writing about the police force. And the screenplay is adapted by none other than Sterling Silliphant, who was one of the most prolific writers in film and television. And of course, Silliphant really good at adapting something like this into a film. And so the film stars George C. Scott and Stacy Keach. They're the main ones in the film. Like George C. Scott is kind of the seasoned veteran, whereas like Stacy Keach, he's the rookie, and you know he's kind of got a little bit of ideals, but those are like easily crushed as they go on. But the beautiful thing about the pairing of George C. Scott and Stacy Keach is that as actors, these two are on each other's level. They're different. There's a bit of an age difference there, but when it comes to acting ability, like you really couldn't say who's the better actor because at that point in George C. Scott's career, of course he's coming off the Oscar for Patton and of course other fucking weird quirky things like They Might Be Giants, but he's also done like some of the best work of his career. Like I'd argue like his comedic shit in Doctor Strangelove is some of his best work. But anywho, and of course Stacy Keach was like merely in the early stages of a phenomenal output that he did in the 70s. Like, before he kicked off the 70s with like The Traveling Executioner and then Fat City, and then here we are in The New Centurions before, an onslaught of other great Stacy Keach films. And of course, Stacy Keach is one of the greatest actors to come out of the 70s. And, I think he probably had an even better body of work in the 70s than somebody like Elliot Gould, who there's just a whole group of these actors that did some of their best work in the 70s and never got to really equal that. Maybe in a couple of films like further down the line, usually in the 90s or the early 2000s, usually like in the 80s, most of these guys couldn't really catch a break. Even Pacino and De Niro had to do, and then Jack Nicholson and Harvey Keitel had to do lame ass shit in the 80s. But it's just the way it goes. It comes in waves. But The New Centurions basically is a film. There's no like set plot. It's really just, seeing the day-to-day life of these police officers in Los Angeles who like they go through a lot of shit. And even the supporting cast is great. Scott Wilson, Clifton James, Eric Estrada's in this as well. There's also a lot of like TV stars that hadn't really like gotten their big TV break. Like Isabel Sanford pops up as a prostitute, and Roger E. Mosley is in this, has one of the great scenes in film where they're trying to arrest him. He's like, I'm not getting in the car, but it's like, call an ambulance. It's like, there's no accident. No, but there will be if you don't get in this car. And it's just that's just the whole like timing of it and everything. And of course, like the film is like, there's a lot of layers. It paints the police in a very sympathetic, humane light. It kind of shows their struggle with shit, like dealing with shooting the wrong person and, having to like make that decision, like they're trying to take that kid away from that drunk bitch that's, always dropping the kid, and they're, basically playing tug of war with the kid. There's a lot of these hard questions, and it opens up that conversation of like, who the fuck would even want to be a cop, and these motherfuckers, they get up every day and do this shit day after day, and even going through the shit that they go through, and I feel that it paints the picture very well, because it probably had great, very in-depth source material. Somebody like Sterling Silliphant gets to like pick and choose the kind of stuff that he really thinks that can pack a punch. And then you've got a very handy, capable director, Richard Fleischer, one of the greatest journeyman directors, who can, basically put all this stuff together. And, about 40 minutes into the film, Stacy Keach gets shot point blank range with a shotgun in the stomach, and, they don't think he's going to make it. And he miraculously does, but in a way, like, we as the audience and Stacy Keach's character himself kind of knows that, maybe that was my time. Maybe that was when my number was up and it didn't come up. And then the whole film we're just waiting to see when it happened. It damn near happens like 3 other times. The action in this is thrilling. It's real gritty, accentuated really great by the magnificent score that Quincy Jones did for the film. And when that fucking chick is dragging him on the car and stuff, or he's basically playing, that line where he says, I couldn't let go, and I couldn't let go, and I couldn't break free, and I couldn't hold on, and I couldn't let go, and all that shit. Just that shit is real, because it was a metaphor for the shit he was actually doing and the point that he was in. And right when he finally, after his wife has left him, and his kind of career just seems to be going nowhere, he meets this magnificent woman, this really hot nurse that would was in the hospital when he first got fucked up, but then just random fucking thing, and then he ends up shot and ends up dying at the end of the film, and which baffles me is the cops, and maybe in real life, but especially in movies, is you have no qualms about shooting down a motherfucker, and then when you see one of your brother officers get gunned down, then you don't even shoot the motherfucker that did it. I'm not saying kill him, but you can at least throw a bullet at him or something. But they don't do that kind of shit. Dude's a bitch, throws his hands up, and But like I said, the new Centurions, it's not only just a watchable film, but it also deals with a lot of heavy subjects, like even George C. Scott's character who kills himself in the middle of the film, and dealing with maybe all I was ever good at was being a cop type shit, and maybe that was depressing as hell, and the fact that you can't change the world, that whole speech about being the new Centurions and shit, that's heavy shit, man, and definitely a film that's even more relevant today. This was kind of the beginning of that. Cop movies were basically westerns for the early 70s and all through into the 80s and stuff. But then that moves us forward to The Rookie, directed and starring Clint Eastwood, with a screenplay by Boaz Yakin and Scott Spiegel. So that kind of explains a lot of the quirkiness and stuff in the film. But you've also got Charlie Sheen, who is the title, the Rookie, basically. And, he wants to get in the Grand Theft Auto division and stuff. And what's funny about The Rookie is it feels like Dirty Harry 6, Grand Theft Auto division, because the thing about it is, at this point in time in Clint Eastwood's career, he was done with making Dirty Harry movies. The Deadpool was the last one, but occasionally I guess he would find shit that he could see himself doing, especially at this point in time where he was really getting long in the tooth, and he was kind of making that transition to just solely directing as opposed to acting in movies as well. But one thing too, though, is he does offer up a lot of the action to Charlie Sheen, who was also at the peak of his career at this point, riding high on on a great classics and shit. But definitely the thing about it is where George C. Scott and Stacy Keach are perfectly paired for acting abilities. Clint Eastwood and Charlie Sheen are perfectly paired when it comes to a movie star abilities, because both of these actors understand what it means to be an action star. All you got to do is just look badass and don't say much. Clint Eastwood, perfected this art throughout his whole career, and Charlie Sheen does his best to play it like Clint Eastwood, and he mildly succeeds in it. But there are scenes where he just when he's basically holding up that fucking bar, strong, trying to get some information, and he's trying to sound tough, saying, all right, motherfuckers, it comes off as lame as shit. If he wasn't shooting people, then you would not even believe that this dude was crazy. And even the supporting cast is great. Raul Julia is exceptional as the villain. He definitely knows how to chew the scenery, and his little racist insults are just funny as hell. And Sonia Braga, the amazing Sonia Braga, that whole little lap dance sequence she does with Clint Eastwood, their little fucking torture tango, I guess you could call it. That's pretty bad. This movie is mostly just a series of moments, and it's kind of I get the feeling that the writers of the screenplay wanted to make fun of the cop genre, specifically when it's trying to be serious, those fucking flashbacks that Charlie Sheen's character has about his dead brother. It just doesn't have that resonance that it's trying to be. So it's when it's trying to be serious, it's funny as hell. When it's trying to be funny, it's it feels more serious. And so it's definitely a movie at odds with himself, because especially if Clint Eastwood is directing and starring in it, he's not doing anything that's going to be outside of the purview of what a Clint Eastwood movie needs to be. And it definitely checks all the boxes of what a Clint Eastwood movie needs to be, but it doesn't check all the boxes of what a great movie needs to be, because like there is a lot of lame shit in the action specifically. Like, you know, there are like when they drive out of that building and it explodes, that's pretty badass. But most of the, you know, maybe even that opening car chase sequence where they got him pinned in the fucking thing. But, you know, even that's kind of lame. Like, especially that the one that really got me, though, was that ending at the airport and they're running and chasing and then they jump. It's almost played for comedy, it seems, but it's trying to be as serious as hell. But it's never gonna. I mean, granted, if we're going back to like airport chase scenes, like, you know, it starts with Bullet and ends at Heat. Now, granted, The Rookie came before Heat, but it didn't do anything to like top Bullet. It doesn't even get into like top five, because you can always just go back to that chase sequence at the end of Dirty Harry and fucking, this is way better than this shit. This is like goddamn Keystone Cops and shit. And, you know, there could be like more intriguing things, like if people died, but it's just, like I said, it checks all the boxes for a Clint Eastwood movie, the perfect movie for old people to go to sleep to when it's playing on TNT in the nursing home. So this round clearly has to go to the new Centurions, because like it's just a real ass movie. It deals with real issues. It has a way of taking real life and making it entertaining. And, you know, the acting is superb, whereas like the acting in The Rookie is below mid and the action's below mid. Even the action in the new Centurions is way more in your face, and it has not even a third of the explosions that The Rookie has, but it manages to pack more of a punch emotionally and physically, and it's devastating. Whereas The Rookie, it's just, oh, look at this cycle, you know, oh, what, maybe that's a metaphor for fucking cop movies. Fuck you and your pretentious ass. So for anybody keeping score, that's 51-45. 70s are up by 6. You know, the 90s were coming back for a little while, but, you know, the 70s had a way of, you know, making like real life dramas real in your face. And you know what? When you got a badass score like that from Quincy Jones, it really energizes your film. So if I've said anything wrong, anything you disagree with, feel free to eviscerate me in the comments. All this stuff is open for debate. You know, this is all a rough draft to a doctoral thesis or a podcast, whatever comes first, whatever pays the most. Because, you know, we're all in this for the money. But shit, I'm also having fun too.